Welcome to Healing Chambers International's presentation of Lyme disease and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. A good analogy to the human body is an aircraft. This particular aircraft cannot get off the deck of the aircraft carrier because it is too heavy and lacks the energy to launch. So therefore, it needs an external or exogenous source of energy. Then, it's able to fly according to its design envelope, just using that energy right at the outset of its mission. So too with the human body. We are designed to heal, whether it's an internal malady or an external wound. Our bodies are designed to heal, but sometimes we lack the energy to heal ourselves. A classic example are diabetic wounds, so commonly treated in hospitals by hyperbarics. Of interest, in that 2-year diabetic wound there's a lot of bacteria, there's a lot of loss of flesh and tissue, and the repair teams have already been recruited to that area. But in 2 years they haven't done their job. Why? Because there's a lack of oxygen there. Here's one of the repair crew, a macrophage, and it's ready to gobble up the bacteria, and then when it's done its work, it's ready to give out epithelial growth factors to start growing flesh and growing blood vessels and healing that wound over. But that repair team needs an oxidative burst. The white blood cells need this, 24 times the requirement for available oxygen. Here we have the same wound, 30 days later, entirely closed up. The problem with this patient, as a diabetic, he was not getting oxygen to his foot, and so essentially hyperbarics provided oxygen to the wound area and the repair crew in a different way. Now notice, just more than filling that hole in that foot was done. The edema went, the skin looks better, the patient kept his foot. Remember, there is an oxidative burst needed for the repair crew to work. Here we see the red blood cells, along with the white cells, leukocytes. Roughly translated, leukocyte means white blood, and there are many different types of leukocytes. What happens with them as they patrol up and down, and finally they get the call to go to an area where there is some bacterial action, or they need to repair, they transform. Here, one of those white cells has transformed into a phagocyte. And that white cell is reaching out like a stinging jellyfish, and it's stinging and killing the bacteria. It uses reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. So when we ask ourselves, free radicals, are they good or are they bad? The answer to that is yes. They're great when you need them, and oxygen will provide these because your body will buffer up and soak up the excess free radicals after the oxygen treatment. Other white cells turn into macrophage, and just like Pac-Man, they go about and they eat cells. Macrophage means big eater. But remember, what is needed by the body at the time is lots of extra oxygen. Now here is our villain, Borrelia burgdorferi. Very hard to kill. It hides. The body tries to find it. The body grows weaker and weaker, and just like that aircraft, the body is eventually overloaded and unable to have its immune system to react to this awful, awful bacteria. So how does hyperbaric oxygen therapy work? Elegantly and simplistically, it is God's gunpowder. Hyper means more than. Baric comes from the word baros, or to weigh and remember. That is how oxygen was first discovered by Joe Priestley and Lavoisier back in the 16th century. They measured its weight. But we're going to actually use the term pressure or hyperbaric. And we're talking about the weight of the gas at sea level. And in pounds per square inch, 20% oxygen, 80% nitrogen for easy mathematics, it's 14.7 pounds per square inch. We can use a different scale, and that's millimeters of mercury, because there's more marks. And doctors love to use the very fine measurements of millimeters of mercury. So the weight of gas at sea level, of dry air, is 760 millimeters of mercury, or the pressure of it, we'll call it. I prefer to call it high dosage or high density oxygen, but the world calls it hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Important. It's simple. It's non-invasive. It's painless, and it is highly effective. It works because of the universal gas laws. Now, there's lots of gas laws, but they call these three the universal. Is if you mess with one, the other two will alter to keep pace with it. The first one is Boyle's law, and that is that you can compress gas. The second one is Dalton's law. That talks about the density or the partial pressure. And the third one is the one that really applies to us, is Henry's law. Gas becomes soluble according to its partial pressure or density. Gas diffuses into clear fluids when the partial pressure of gas is increased. And a classic example is if we take a clear glass of water, put it in the refrigerator, it will come out cloudy. And that's because the carbon dioxide already dissolved in that water when it comes out of the faucet tries to escape the onrushing cold. If you'd like a nice clear glass of water, all you need to do is to boil the water vigorously. Get rid of the carbon dioxide, then you can have a crystal clear ice block. Now for a more obvious illustration of this universal gas law. If we actually take a bottle of orange water, if we stick a little bit of pressure in there, 14.7 pounds per square inch of carbon dioxide, it will diffuse into the clear fluid, and the CO2 will become H2CO3, or carbonic acid. And that will just stay as carbonic acid until we actually pop the lid, and equilibrium is occurring, and we get all of these lovely little bubbles that are very refreshing. We might also mention, apart from the sugar, which is very bad and feeds yeast, there's about 16 teaspoons of sugar in a bottle that size. The high acidity of sodas is very, very bad for Lyme patients. No sodas at all. So essentially, that 2-penny plastic bottle is a hyperbaric chamber, because gas diffuses into clear fluid when the partial pressure of gas is increased. The human body is 88% water. We cannot feel compression except in our ears. But if we substitute oxygen under pressure, once again, Henry's law will kick in. This is a law that cannot be broken. It's the same as the law of gravity. If you fall, gravity hurts. If you go in a chamber, you will find that the oxygen or nitrogen or whatever gas is in there will diffuse into the clear fluid when the partial pressure of gas or the density is increased. Now, we need to talk about some silly mythology about hyperbarics. And it saddens me that I even read this from hyperbaric technicians, and I read it from doctors. They say that under compression, the oxygen molecules become smaller. That is so false. These people need to understand their medicine and their science. All you are doing by putting gas under pressure is you're pushing the molecules closer together. Just like these people in the Tokyo subway are cramming more people onto that subway train. If we keep putting pressure on, we'll end up making the gas liquid, but the molecules will all be the same size. Hold the thought of the subway. Hold the thought of the carriages. When we take a breath in, at 760 millimeters of mercury, remember, 20% of it is oxygen and 80% of it is nitrogen. So let's think of them as people going into a big subway station. Nitrogen has a use, but not as vital as oxygen. So 20 of the people that come into our lungs actually do some work. So the alveoli pressure of oxygen that's keeping you alive as you're watching this is 104 millimeters of mercury of oxygen. Got that? Remember, we said that you can weigh oxygen. If you visualized how much oxygen our body uses, and this is very important, oxygen actually can be weighed, and oxygen is a cellular nutrient. Our bodies actually consume in a 24-hour period about 1.2 pounds of molecular oxygen. That's what is alive. Now, because the nitrogen folk don't do all that much when they come in and out of our lungs, we're already saturated. About 3% of our body weight is made up of nitrogen. If we get rid of the nitrogen people and stop them coming into the big subway, we increase the density of oxygen in there that can jump on and off the little carriages, which are, of course, our red blood cells. So we have now, on 100% oxygen, have 5 times the amount of oxygen or density of oxygen that we had when we were breathing air with the nitrogen in it. Remember, when we just breathe air, we consume about 1.2 pounds of oxygen per day. If you breathe for an hour and a half, 100% oxygen, you'll see that you're actually starting to, according to Henry's law, melt down oxygen, and we increase that amount of oxygen to just under 2 pounds. Now let's imagine that you're in a chamber, and all of this dense oxygen is coming in because we have got no nitrogen at all in there. If we double the pressure, we are going to double the amount of alveolar oxygen or the density. Now you won't feel it. You have to worry about your ears and make sure that you keep your ears clear, because that's an airspace, but your body, mostly water, is incompressible. The molecules themselves, they don't like being squashed in there, and so they fight a little bit for space, and during the compression phase of oxygen, it gets warmer. So if you add an hour and a half of oxygen at 2 atmospheres per day, look at that. You have almost doubled the amount of oxygen that your body will consume in a 24-hour period. Let's look at this again. Down at the bottom there is at the normal partial pressure of oxygen. The next one up is oxygen at 100%. If we go further and further, and we're talking about oxygen melting down into our body or diffusing through it, at 2 atmospheres we're up to about 1600 millimeters of mercury. But to kill bacteria, this is the pressure or the density of oxygen that we need for that 1.5 hour period. I want you to remember that. 2.4 atmospheres, around about, is what the 2 doctors, Fife, worked their magic on their patients and got such wonderful results. 2.4 atmospheres. It brings us to a fad, and that is these inflatable chambers. People don't realize that these inflatable chambers are extremely low pressure, and if they're run according to their approvals with the FDA, they use only room air. Remember, you go back, at this moment, what is keeping you alive is 144 millimeters of mercury pressure of oxygen in your lungs. Remember too, that we actually need to get up here to 2.4 atmospheres for about 1900 millimeters of mercury to kill bacteria such as Lyme. What will this little chamber do? It just doesn't go there. It just doesn't cut it. I often say to people, if you walked out into the car park right now and you found in the parking lot you had a flat tire, to put 4 pounds of air in that tire would not even lift the rim off the blacktop. You really have to put close on 30 pounds, then you can drive off and get your tire repaired. So, please, please, don't use the bag. It's going to consume your time. It is a sham when it comes to Lyme disease. Just a little reminder here. Oxygen perfusion by circulation. I want you to remember the P in perfusion, because that is P for pump, namely your heart. When we take a breath, right as you're watching this, the nitrogen guys and the oxygen guys go into our lungs, and they have to change. The oxygen goes from a gas to a molecule, a chemical molecule, and it has a bunch of barriers to get through. The surfactant or water layer in your lung actually helps, but it's got to go through these other layers into what essentially is the railroad tracks through your body. Oxygen is an obstinate gas. It does not want to actually go into a molecular form. However, our design envelope says that the little carriages that carry oxygen, namely our red blood cells, have a magic ingredient in them, hemoglobin. That's an iron molecule. And the oxygen is actually tugged through all of these barriers, not only pushed by the density in the lungs, but it's tugged through because of the hemoglobin. So when you take a breath, oxygen will quickly go into these red blood cells, and they're instantly saturated, about 98%. Then, when they're fully saturated, what happens is your heart pumps, P for perfusion, all of these little oxygen carriages down the different tunnels and supplies the cells. When the oxygen gets to where it needs to be, our cells have wonderful little devices in them called mitochondria, the engines of the cell. Some cells have more than others. So when there's a demand for oxygen, the oxygen is pumped as close as it can be, P for perfusion, to the cells that are demanding the energy. Then there is a diffusion, where the oxygen actually goes through the water in between the cells, the interstitial fluid, and it fills up these and supplies the energy that is required by the cells. The cells also, of course, run on sugar, or a form of glucose, which our body converts food into. This is called the diffusion gradient. Diffusion is passive. There is no energy output by the body at all. Let's give you an example of diffusion. We take 3 glasses of corn starch. We've made this first one extremely thick. Then the second one, the middle one, is in actual fact 50-50. It's thicker than the glass of water we're using as a control, and the first one is the thickest. So given a little bit of time, we put some food coloring in there, 3 drops in each. Given some time, the speed of diffusion depended on the thickness or viscosity of the fluid. Notice the time. In less than 2 minutes, our thinnest, least viscous fluid became uniformly blue. That was rapid. The slower one was the one next door to it, which was 50-50 water, and the other half was this cornstarch. The slower one actually took about 2 hours, and the cornstarch itself took almost 26 hours to become uniformly blue. Now, had we stirred this and used some energy to hurry up the saturation in there, that would have been perfusion. This is part of the reason why you actually sit in the chamber for so long, is because diffusion is passive. There's no energy output required by your body, because it just happens. A Newtonian law called Henry's gas law, one of the 3. Let's put down another piece of silly mythology about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And very often when you read a newspaper article about it, they quote a doctor, and the doctor will say, or maybe the technician will say, oxygen under pressure is forced into the body's cells. We just showed that it's not forced at all. It just happens. If somebody told me that to get in the chamber, and they call it high pressure oxygen, and it was going to force, I would make the assumption it was going to hurt. No, it doesn't hurt at all. It is gentle. Remember our little patient who was wheeled into our chamber? We'll see more of her in a moment. But you can go into the chamber, you can watch a movie, listen to music, and you don't hurt at all. You just have to be aware that you have to equalize your ears. That's like going for a ride in an aircraft. So let's get rid of that silly myth and that silly saying there is no force at all in a hyperbaric chamber. Where exactly does this extra oxygen go? The oxygen goes into compartments in our bodies, much like if we had a stadium and we had the Rolling Stones in the stadium. How do we fit more people into the stadium? Simply, we actually put them into areas where they don't usually go. And they put lots of seats in there. So how to increase the body's oxygen saturation? Well, if our red blood cells are already saturated, we put them in places where they don't normally go. Talking about saturation, here's a classic example. 2 glasses of water, the same amount of sugar, put in both of them and stirred vigorously. If you look at the right-hand glass of water, what are you going to find? You're going to find total saturation. It's clear. In the other one, the sugar is floating around on the bottom. What it is heat. Look at the little thermometers in there. One is hot water, the other is cold water. That is why in solutions we use heat, not pressure, to get rid of solutes. And for example, an iceberg is essentially fresh water because it dumps off the salt. We have lots of clear fluid compartments of different viscosities. Our plasma is one of them. When the plasma is full of the additional oxygen, it starts to dump off this additional oxygen molecules into our intracellular fluids, which is our biggest water compartment. The interstitial fluid, and that is the water in between the cells, also fills. And then we have this tiny percentage of things such as teardrops, endolymph in your ears, and fluid compartments like that. That is why after 1 hour and 30 minutes in the chamber, usually in total, your body is totally saturated, supersaturated all the way through with this additional oxygen. You climb out of the chamber with 20 to 25 times more oxygen on board than you did when you got in. And it's interesting, even your urine will actually carry oxygen after a hyper. The cascade of events, as we mentioned, the primary events is hyperoxygenation or supersaturation. This causes your pH shift to alkaline, powers of hydrogen. It shifts to alkaline. The secondary events for the body, because the body reacts to this extra oxygen as it would to any drug. Oxygen then becomes a drug as well as a cellular nutrient. Blood vessels constrict during the treatment. They don't need to be as big as they are. Plenty of oxygen there for them. The host factor function. You are the host for all of this extra oxygen. White blood cell oxidative killing occurs. A lot of bugs die just because of the high oxygen tensions. And as the Dr. Fife found out, high oxygen tensions do kill the Borrelia burgdorferi, Lyme disease spirochete. White cell activity, we've mentioned that. Your repair cells go crazy. Also, very interesting, there is an antibiotic synergism. Along with the white blood cell oxidative killing, the cellular walls become a little less fastidious about allowing antibiotics in. And so in a seek and destroy ability, hyperbarics helps regular medical responses. The pH shift to alkaline is interesting because during the Herxheimer's period, everybody hurts. So as soon as we start getting rid of the acid, there's a reduction of pain. There's a reduced swelling. We saw that. And the white cell also resolves bruising. Most important of all, hyperbaric oxygen therapy has the most powerful anti-inflammatory effect. Essentially, it is way better than steroids. Remember how it works? The white cells actually need 24 times the amount of oxygen that they normally have. The little phagocytes manufacture their poison, and in a process known as phagocytosis, they actually reach out and sting the BB pathogen. Then along comes our big chompers, the macrophage, and eats up the bodies. The Borrelia burgdorferi is an interesting one because as it dies, you remember we talked about the plasmids. The plasmids, as they decay in the body, give out very powerful endotoxic poisons and neurotoxic poisons, thus the Herxheimer's. So really, the big challenge for the patient is coping with the Herxheimer's problem. But oxygen, in most cases, kills BB. What to expect with hyperbaric oxygen therapy? A whole bunch of things. You're going to need between 26 and 40 90-minute consecutive daily treatments. No, our centers don't give people a day off. We asked one of our medical directors about this, and he said, when we tell people to take antibiotics, we don't tell them to have Saturdays and Sundays off. We say, keep taking these, don't miss a dose. A strong Herx will happen during your treatment. Typically, it will happen after 5 or 6 days, and it should last no more than 10 days. But there may be a reoccurring Herxheimer's response. This is a good sign. This means that you are killing off. Your body is actually using that external source of energy, oxygen, to get to work and to eradicate the spirochete. Vision changes happen. Not so much with young people, but if you're over 40, you can expect to become myopic. Usually, this is transient, and within a month, your eyes will be back to normal. So during your treatment, we have strategies for coping with your Herxheimer's, as you'll see in a moment. And one of the strategies is that during the treatments, we actually have our lymphatic drainage power plate, and we also actually get people working on their strength. There is a probability of up to a year of rehabilitation strategies after you have killed the bug. So don't expect that after 40 days you will feel like you felt 10 years ago before you got sick. You have to work at restoring your strength, your energy, and vigor. Let's go back to some of the patients that you saw in the first instance. This was one of our very first patients. 12 years later, this lady is now leading a vibrant life. We'll show her to you in a moment. Here's little Tori. Here's Tori in the chamber.
Hi everybody, today is Friday.
And here
it was
is Megan.
27th treatment and things are going really, really good. I have a really bad headache right now, but other than that, I feel really, really I feel great.
Tell them about the patch too.
Hold on.
Here is Megan, 3 years after her treatments. Megan's family opened up their own hyperbaric center because they were already into medicine in Bonifay, Florida. Megan has taken her life back, and she's now gone off to get married and raise a family. Here's Kaz. Remember, Caslin actually had the treatments at the same time as Megan. Kaz, who looks like a rock star and breaks the girls' hearts, is now getting on with his life, firm and vigorous and having fun. Here's Tori. Remember Tori in the chamber? One of the interesting things that we do notice amongst our female patients is that they have what we call makeup attacks. We know the girls are getting better when they start feeling glamorous and wearing makeup. So Victoria is back to vibrant good health, and that's almost 2 years after her treatments. Remember, this was a girl that couldn't walk, the same as Megan couldn't walk. These were people that had Lyme disease for around 6 years and truly believed that their life was over. We'd like to show you this girl too. Another 6-year Lyme disease. A lot of horse riding people get Lyme disease because the ticks fall down their collars as they go under the brush, bite them around their waist, and then for the next 6 years they don't ride a horse. There's too much energy. And here's this young lady. She's actually out, as young people should, and having fun with her life. And if you have a look at her hair, she is vibrantly healthy, out there breaking all of the boys' hearts. We go back to Crystal. 10 years ago, she was wheeled into our chamber, and here she is today. Healing Chambers International is one of the fastest growing chain of hyperbaric centers across the United States. We believe that if a doctor writes a prescription for any malady at all, we believe that that prescription should be filled if it's for hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Finally, we'd like again to acknowledge the people who we quoted and whose fine work has led to an advancement in hyperbaric oxygen therapy. In particular, we would like to salute Dr. William or Bill Fife, who passed away in 1998 at the age of 90, a true scientist, and also his daughter who is carrying on his work. Again, we point out, and this is very important, in quoting such people or showing such insignias of organizations, this is not in any way an endorsement of this presentation. Also, the testimonials offered about the positive results of hyperbaric oxygen therapy in the treatment of Lyme disease cannot be considered as Healing Chambers promoting the use of hyperbarics for a particular malady. Essentially, we are a dispensary of high-density oxygen, and we will fill whatever medical prescription that is written out for hyperbaric oxygen therapy. In fact, state and federal law requires us to do so. Again, my name is Robert Lyne-Sands, and as the founder of Healing Chambers International, I thank you for taking the time to listen and watch and learn.